Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
India, Canada, given their common interest in the Indo-Pacific, given the fact that Canada is very much part of the North American security matrix, with the Americans also a member of the Five Eyes Alliance, and to that extent an ally in the Indo-Pacific strategic policy with India, under Justin Trudeau, Canada has followed a minoritarian politics, particularly vis-a-vis the Sikh population there. At least that is what is relevant to India, and that has caused strains in Canada's relationship with India. What is it that is driving Canada's politics? And what is it that prevents Canada's politicians, the political class in general, but the Liberal Party in particular, Canadians, Canadian intelligence, Canadian government, Canadian politicians, least of all, the Canadian elected government should have zero interest, zero stake in allowing any mischief to be carried out by people living there, and mostly Canadian citizens. In fact, almost entirely Canadian citizens in the country of their origin, which is India, just as India has no such interest. That said, these embarrassed noises are often made, but this tamasha goes on in Canada. Just a while back, and we had featured that in another episode of Cut The Clutter, there was also the so-called Khalistan referendum in Brampton. Now, Brampton is a city with a large Sikh population. The fact is that Canada today, which has a population of 3.8 crores, has about 8 lakh Sikhs at last count. The number may have gone up because immigration is going on all the time, legal and illegal. So it's about 2% of Canada's population. 2% of Canada's population, and yet the Sikh population in Canada, which has migrated from India and which has also had a generation born in Canada, they punch way above their weight. So what is the reason the Canadian politicians are so pressured to tolerate all of this that goes on? They are 2% of Canada's population. In fact, as things stand, they are almost as much of a percentage of Canada's population as the Sikhs might be of India's population. So 2% or maybe a little less than 2, between 1.5 to 2% of all of Canada's population are Sikhs. Of these, a large number are concentrated in the Brampton area. So in the Brampton area, 1,63,000 Sikhs live. That is according to the 2021 Canadian census. So of all the Sikhs living in Canada, more than 20%, more than 1 in 5 live in the Brampton area. But why are the Sikhs so powerful and so dominant in Canadian politics that the Canadian government has not called them out? Now, to understand this, I have to take you back more than 3 decades. I have to take you back almost 4 decades, in fact, to 1985. That is 38 years back. That is when, in the month of June, at the anniversary of that terrible tragedy is now coming in just over a week now. That was the bombing of the Air India aircraft, Air India jumbo jet, Kanishka, AI-182. That plane was bombed by a device planted by a suitcase with a timed device planted in Canada. How that was planted is a complex story. I will tell you very briefly. Right now, later in the month, around the day of the anniversary, my colleagues will do another piece in the series that we do called Past Forward. That is when we in great detail look at something that happened in the past that has relevance now. And now, given the activity which has now come back, the so-called quote-unquote Khalistani or radical Sikh activity, I prefer to call it radical Sikh activity. Now that this has come back and is again bedeviling India-Canada relations, it's even more timely to talk about that tragedy, because the Canadian government, Canadian police, Canadian intelligence, by the way, I'm not saying anything new. All of them were indicted in an inquiry commission headed by a judge in Canada, of course, in the true Indian fashion. In the true Indian fashion, that will do the Indian judicial system proud, and that will make Indian police system and prosecution system actually look a little bit better or less worse That inquiry commission was set up 21 years. 21 years after the tragedy. The tragedy was 1985. The commission was set up in 2006. That commission said that there was a cascading series of errors, and I'm quoting from the commission, a cascading series of errors by the Canadian government, by Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, CSIS, all together, because there were warnings and warnings and warnings. There were warnings by their own agents. There were warnings about the specific people who ultimately carried out the bombing. There were warnings from Indian intelligence. Because of those warnings, Canadian police and intelligence themselves had gone to court and asked for warrants to put the ultimate perpetrators of these bombings under surveillance. They were picking up phone conversations where this funny talk was going on, and some faltu kind of codes were being used. Have you written that book, etc., which means later it turned out, have you bought that ticket, stuff like that. They kept on tossing it. They did not take it seriously. There were two suspects in different cases, two Sikh suspects in different cases who, while in police custody, said that they knew something was being planned, that a plane was going to be blown up, an Air India plane was going to be blown up. And that was months before this happened. And yet RCMP and the Canadian intelligence dismissed that as unreliable. So if something like that had happened in India, say before 26/11, if specific warnings about specific individuals had been made, those specific individuals had been put under surveillance, and yet nothing had been done, even though evidence came up as a result of that evidence, heads would have rolled. In Canada, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Not just that, in that entire conspiracy, while everybody was named, trial started late, convictions took place, hold your breath, convictions took place in 2005. That is 20 years. So I told you that's just like trial courts in India. 20 years, 25 years, no problem. The difference is 20, 25 years in India, the guy will be kept in jail and in an Indian jail. In this case, these convictions took place 20 years, and you know what? How many people got convicted? Only one got convicted, Inderjeet Singh Rayat. And he also got convicted not for blowing up the plane, but for manslaughter. He initially said that he will talk about the others and he'll collaborate with the police and he'll name others. So he got probably a softer treatment and softer sentence. Then he reneged. He refused to cooperate with the police and name others, after which he was given a little more jail. Then he came out. Now he's a fully free man. No problem, right? So 329 people got blown up. Only one man got convicted for a few years of soft sentence. He's now out, living a normal life. He was also not convicted for blowing up the plane. So who blew up the plane and why was the government so soft? So I will talk about the plane and the incident in just a little bit. I will first tell you the politics. Why is Canadian politics so soft on the Sikh vote bank? Now, our foreign minister, S. Jaishankar, said that this is owed to vote bank politics. He said, we can't see what other reason can be there for Canadian government to be putting up with this except vote bank politics. Now, vote bank politics it is that brought Trudeau to India, and he did all this tamasha, trying to dance bhangra, etc. on his high commissioner's lawns, wearing that funny Manevar style clothing, landing up in Amritsar and at his receptions and with a man called Jaspal Atwal. Now, Jaspal Atwal was a man who was convicted of shooting to kill, although he did not succeed in killing him, shooting to kill a Punjab minister and a Akali Dal minister who was visiting Canada. So he tried to kill him. But even before that, he was charged with trying to bludgeon to death Ujjal Dosanjh, who's a moderate Sikh politician in Canada from the Liberal Party, who briefly became the Liberal Premier, that's like Chief Minister, Liberal Premier of British Columbia. He was hit in the head with an iron club, had to have 80 stitches, 80 stitches in 1985, and barely survived, 80 stitches in his head. He now is a writer. He's still seen as a target by the radicals in the Sikh community. And remember, he was also from the liberal community. Now, what is this power of the Sikh community that Canadian government, which is otherwise so committed to law and order, fighting terrorism, etc., is not able to put it down effectively? And why is it so that the Canadian system, it is, in my view, the biggest blot on Canada's history over the past 4 decades, that those guilty of bombing Air India Flight 182 Kanishka were not punished. And you know what? That plane was blown up, and you might say, "ठीक है, Air India का plane है." This was an Air India plane. Most of the people who died were Indian. Why should the Canadians care so much? That is how Western societies are. That would be a stereotyped reaction. But there is a twist there. Of the 329 people who died in bombing, 329, it was a full plane. Of the 329 people who died, 268 were Canadian. They were Canadian citizens. Most of them may have been of Indian origin, but they were Canadian citizens. So for a country that claims the right to such massive political correctness that they can preach to the world, they also made a distinction in their heads between their citizens, Canadian citizens, and immigrant citizens. That's why they cared less about what happened to this plane. This was the biggest, the greatest airline tragedy until 9/11 happened much later, 16 years later. And yet, Canadians didn't seem to be so bothered about it. In fact, there is a memorial set up in Ireland to commemorate people who died in this crash, because the crash took place not far from Ireland or closest to Ireland. A Canadian Prime Minister visited that memorial for the first time only in 2006. Now, I don't know whether that is because in 2005 trials or whatever there was to those trials were over, I don't know. But that's when the Prime Minister then, Paul Martin, again of Liberal Party, he visited for a memorial service on 23rd June 2005, the anniversary day that year. And he said, and I quote his statement, he said, "Make no mistake," and I quote, "make no mistake, the flight may have been Air India's, it may have taken place, that means the crash may have taken place in Ireland, but this is a Canadian tragedy." If this is a Canadian tragedy, then the way the Canadians handle that tragedy should be a national shame for them. It's also an international shame. How can somebody plant a bomb in an airliner taking off from your airport under your watch, right? And then later I will tell you a story also of what kind of negligence took place with security for this flight. That I will come to. But the fact is that any country's conscience should have been shaken by this. But you know, I've seen opinion polls coming out of Canada and Canadian media that say that majority of the people in Canada still are not convinced that this was a Canadian tragedy. This went 268. 268 of the 329 people killed were Canadian. And once again tells you something about Canadian public opinion. So people of foreign origin, in this case the Sikhs, mostly the Sikhs, almost entirely the Sikhs who became Canadian citizens, are probably seen as less Canadian as the rest of them. And that is something also that Canadian Sikhs should also remember. Now, I will give you the breakup. 329 killed, it's very interesting. 268 Canadians, 27 British, 24 Indian. Of the 24 Indian, 22 were crew members. So almost everybody on that plane was either a Canadian national or a British national. There were about a dozen others who were of indeterminate nationality because people have multiple passports, etc., etc. And this was 1985. So this was the attitude to an airline bombing involving the death of so many of Canada's own citizens. Now, the power of the Sikh population there. Now, I see an article by Douglas Todd in Vancouver Sun, which my colleague and our national security editor, Praveen Swami, has passed on to me. Now, in Vancouver Sun, Douglas Todd says, and the article is titled, "Why Sikhs Are So Powerful?" He says that's because the Sikhs work through the Gurdwara system. Canada has about 200 Gurdwaras. Each Gurdwara has an election. So it's in that election that local Sikh leadership emerges, and Gurdwaras then collect a lot of money. Most of it comes in cash. These Sikh leaders who win Gurdwara elections, they get local power, and they are then able to also promise to the politicians that they will help transfer votes, because at least the older generation still votes based on what is decided at the congregations. Also, they are very good at lobbying and getting together. So they are able to get a disproportionate number of seats from the political parties contesting in the area where they have the votes, and usually those seats are won by the Liberal Party. That is the reason in today's Canadian Parliament of 338, there are 15 Sikh MPs, although only 6 of them wear the turban, but 15 Sikh MPs. Look at India in comparison, 543, the number of Sikh MPs usually varies between 10 and 13, right? So Canadian Parliament, much smaller than India's, has 15, it had 18 earlier. In fact, Trudeau's earlier cabinet had 4 Sikh ministers, cabinet ministers, including the defense minister Hardeep Singh, whose arrival in India caused a little bit of trouble because Amrinder Singh, then the chief minister of Punjab, he had the courage and the gumption to say that he will not receive or greet him because he had old radical connections with the World Sikh Organization. Of course, the Canadian government denied that. Hardeep Singh also said that they believe in India's integrity, etc., etc. Those are motherhood and apple pie kind of statements, but there was a lot of distrust in India. The current cabinet, the current Trudeau cabinet has 2 Sikh ministers. In fact, the first time Trudeau had come, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was still Prime Minister, his last visit, which was a disaster, was when Mr. Modi was Prime Minister. But earlier, when he had come in, when Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister, he had half jokingly, but also half seriously boasted that, look, my cabinet has more Sikhs than Dr. Manmohan Singh's cabinet. The question, however, is why? If they are 2% or less than 2% of your population, how come there are about 6% of your national parliament and you had 4 cabinet members from that community? That tells you the power of bloc voting. That's why what's happening between Canadian government and the local Sikh politics is purely a question of vote bank politics. Now, if I take you back to Douglas Todd's article, he gives you 3 factors how this Sikh politics enables the Sikh population of Canada to punch above their weight. Number 1, he said, which I mentioned just now, board elections at the Gurdwara, and then places like Vancouver, Mississauga, Brampton, Calgary. Those are the places which have large Sikh populations. And a lot of these Gurdwara elections are also polarized along the lines of liberal versus radical. And radical means radical in the radical sense that matters to India. Radical separatist for India. Number 2, in these Gurdwaras, cash becomes available because a lot of the chadhawa, a lot of the stuff that devotees leave at the Gurdwaras is in cash. So this is money that you can use for many things. Also, the predominant caste group in Canada of Sikh immigrants is the Jat Sikhs. So there is a large Jat Sikhs network, family network, clan network, intermarrying, etc. So they become a very well-knit vote bank. I'll let you go now, but since I promised you that I will tell you about a series of blunders or callousness. Many heads should have rolled in Canada because of this, but didn't happen. This is all leading up to the bombing of Air India, Kanishka, Air India 182. Now, first of all, the plan was to blow up not 1 aircraft, but 2 aircraft, 2 big 747s. So in that case, the casualty figure would have been larger than on those planes in 9/11. The other plane was to take off from Narita airport in Tokyo, and there also a similar bomb was planned. It's just that the devices used, they were both bought from Radio Shack or someplace like that, some retailing store for electronic equipment. One was a digital radio with a clock that was put on Kanishka. The other, which was to be put on the plane in Narita, taking off from Narita, was a Sanyo tuner, right? It just so happened that the geniuses, thank God, who put that bomb on the suitcase which was to go on the plane in Narita, they forgot that Japan does not follow daylight saving time as the Western world does. So that bomb blew up an hour before it was to get on the plane. So the bomb actually blew up on the baggage belt, killed 2 of the baggage handlers, but did not go on the plane. The other bomb went on the plane. How did the bomb go on the plane? Because the guy who was checking this bomb on the plane, he checked onto a flight from Vancouver to Toronto, saying that I have a connection from Toronto to Air India 182 going to Delhi. So the person at the airline counter said to him, look, you don't have a confirmed ticket. I can't check your suitcase through. But this guy said, oh, my brother's there. What do I do, etc. A Canadian agent checked that bag through. So that bag was checked through, and then this man who had registered himself as M. Singh or Manjeet Singh, he did not even board that flight from Vancouver to Toronto because who knows, Suppose the timing device is not right and the bomb blows up, I might get killed. So he did not go on that plane, and yet that suitcase traveled on that plane, and then at Toronto that was transferred again to the Air India flight, and that is the bomb that blew up later. Now, I told you about all the warnings they had, all the warnings, all the surveillance that they had carried out, the cascading series of error that the inquiry commission pointed out to. But some of the other things that happened were that a known criminal in Canada who had carried out a serial criminal, he came to the police and he said, listen, this man Talvinder Singh Parmar, he was the kingpin of this bombing, Kanishka bombing, that he came to me with a suitcase filled with $2 lakh in currency notes and said, I will give you this money, go and put a bomb on this plane. And he said, he came to the police, this guy, there is honor among thieves. He came to the police and he said, look, I've done many bad things in life, but blowing up a plane with passengers, I don't like it. So I will not do it, but I was offered this money. This guy is trying to do it. This is in August 1984, right? The police thought, this guy is fibbing, aisa kuch nahi hua. Then in September again, a man called Hardeep Singh Nijjar, he was caught in some other crime by Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He also told them, in trying to get some kind of a lenient treatment, he said, look, there is a bombing of an Air India plane being planned. Once again, the police thought, oh, this guy is fibbing, no such thing is going to happen. So once again, that warning, specific warning or specific tip-off was ignored. Then there was another of the suspects who later got convicted, Indrajit Singh Rayat. He came to me to buy dynamite. And he said that I want enough dynamite to blow up a tree stump, because the excuse was, okay, I want to blow up a tree stump, it's blocking somebody's garden or something, right? That information also surfaced, but nothing happened. On the day the suitcase was put on the plane, there was security because Air India and Government of India had warned the Canadian authorities that there were fears of a terror attack. So the X-ray machine at the airport broke down, right? X-ray machine at the airport had broken down, but there was a fallback, and fallback was a manual scanner. And the manual scanner, when you took it close to an explosive device, would let out a screech. That scanner did let out a screech, indeed. But that was not notified to Air India authorities. Oh, third world aircraft hai, kaun parwah karta hai? Maybe it was a British Airways aircraft, or maybe Japan Airlines. Somebody would have bothered. But Air India, they didn't bother. And that's how the plane was blown up. Now, a couple of things happened after that. I told you that nobody really got punished in Canada, right? But a few people later got into trouble. Ajaib Singh Bagri, who was one of the key suspects, he got acquitted in 2005. And the reason he and many others got acquitted was that some of the evidence, including tape recordings and affidavits, written by people who were key witnesses, but not treated as admissible witnesses any longer by the court. Because why? Because those witnesses got assassinated. And I will tell you two names. So the conversation took place between Ajaib Singh Bagri, one of the key suspects, and Tarsem Singh Purewal, the editor of Desh Pardesh, took place in January 1995. Very early, must have been first week or so. In that conversation, it was said that, look, we had never meant to kill so many people. The idea was that the plane will reach Heathrow, and once the passengers are off the plane, then the bomb will blow up. So people will not get killed. It says that the plane got late, and that's the reason it got blown up. That evidence and that recording was there. Before that, Tara Singh Nijjar had already signed an affidavit saying that he knew about this plan. And Tara Singh Nijjar also was in touch with Purewal. Now what happened? Within weeks, on 24th January in Southall, Tarsem Singh Purewal was assassinated, right? Who has the need to assassinate him? And then 3 years later, on November 18, 1998, Tara Singh Nijjar was assassinated. He was shot at Surrey in British Columbia. With that, both the key witnesses disappeared, and as the witnesses disappeared, all the evidence they had given earlier became irrelevant. So you know what, it's a tough thing to say. But the kingpin in this, Talvinder Singh Parmar, he now thought that nothing could happen to him because Canadians could do nothing to him, British could do nothing to him, or maybe didn't want to do anything to him because he was traveling there. Before that, even before Operation Blue Star, etc., he'd been arrested in Germany on a tip-off from Indian intelligence that he's planning the assassination of Indira Gandhi. Germans let him off saying we don't have sufficient evidence. So he thought He was a cat's whiskers, nothing will happen to him. And he had now moved to Pakistan from where he was running his operations in India. Then, for some reason, he came into India. And then he was killed in an encounter with 6 more of his associates. Now, if you go to internet, you will find that his people, even on Wikipedia, etc., keep on saying that he was arrested, interrogated, and executed in an extrajudicial manner. I don't know what happened. Maybe, and that's my instinct also, that he was lured to come into India. Because, if the Canadians will not make you pay for your sins, if the British will not make you pay for your sins, if the Germans did not make you pay for your sins, the Pakistanis actually will pay you more and more. The more the sins you commit, they'll pay you more. Then maybe Indian intelligence thought that the good thing was to lure him into India. And as he came into India, he was killed along with his 6 associates in an encounter with Punjab police in 1992. Now, the reason we told you this involved and detailed story today is because once you allow radicalism to grow in your backyard, you don't know what consequences it will have. This is the kind of consequences it has had for Canada in the past.